welcome to the third episode in our Top 10 Movies of the Decade series. I'm Henry Higgins, and this episode we are dealing with 2012. This is where some of Josh's influence is going to start coming into it. As always, it's going to be our top 10 movies of that period, of that year. So let's go through them one by one until we find out which is number one, and goes on to the final episode into the last battle to be crowned the top movie of the decade. Coming in at number 10 is The Man with the Iron Fists. This movie came from nowhere, at least in my circle. I just heard about it as it was being released and watched it, and I've watched it about 24 times since then. It is an amazing movie, directed by RZA from the Wu-Tang Clan, also stars him. It's a labour of love. You can tell watching it the influence of the old style martial arts movies, kung fu movies. It's got a fantastic cast, including RZA himself, Russell Crowe, Kung Lee, who was a kickboxer and MMA fighter, Lucy Liu is in it, Rick Yun, Dave Bautista, and Jamie Chung. The reason it's made the list here, other than it just being such an enjoyable movie, is how it expertly pays homage to the martial arts movies of the 70s. It does it so well, and I grew up on those movies thanks to my dad. My dad is a 6th dan now, black belt in Shotokan Karate. He's been an instructor for as long as I can remember. He is considered possibly the highest ranked Scottish karate person. He's been a world champion. In that world, he excels. And because of him, I grew up watching martial arts movies, the ninja movies, the actual Street Fighters, that kind of thing. And there was a lot of fantastic movies, and this pays a homage to them fantastically. The characters in the movie are very well realised. The lead, the man with the iron fists, played by RZA, is a sympathetic figure, and essentially he's a blacksmith who has his hands cut off, so makes himself iron fists to replace them, hence the title. Batista plays a character called Brass Body, who can turn his body to brass, so his skin is impenetrable. He's formidable in this role. He's actually fantastic, man. Lucy Liu and Jamie Chung are fantastic in their roles as well. They do a really great job. This obviously goes with the writers also, of not letting them fall into the stereotypical token female role, especially in a martial arts movie. The basic story is just a classic revenge tale, but it's done so well. Soundtrack so beautifully. The sound effects, the sound design, especially during the fights, is phenomenal as well. The choreography, everything about this movie just rocks. Everything about it is just fantastic. And it's definitely a movie when Josh is a little older that will be on the list for us to go through. But for now, it has to settle for number 10 of 2012. Following that, in at number 9 is Looper. And Looper was... To me, it's a movie that gets better each time you watch it. You pick up other little things. It's directed by Rian Johnson, who also did The Last Jedi, and got far too much stick for what he did in that movie. It stars Bruce Willis, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, Emily Blunt, Paul Dano, who also featured in Cowboys and Aliens in the last episode, Piper Perabo, and Jeff Daniels in a fantastic role. The basic story of a looper is you are a hitman for criminal gangs in the future. Time travel has been invented, but the criminals are the only one that can afford to actually use it and run it. And what they do is, if someone needs to be whacked, someone needs to be taken out, made disappear, they send them back in time to a looper, they let the looper know when and where the victim is going to arrive. As soon as they appear, Literally, as soon as they appear, boom, they get shot with a blunderbuss and killed. Then the Looper can bury them. They have silver bars on their back, and that's how the Looper gets paid. The plot of this is Joseph Gordon-Levitt is a Looper in our time. Bruce Willis plays the older version, and Loopers, when it's time for them to retire, get sent back to be killed by themselves to close the loop, hence the name Looper. Bruce Willis, his version of Joe gets sent back, but the young version of Joe hesitates because normally they've got a hood on their head, but Bruce Willis arrives without a hood, startles him, turns around, he sees the gold bricks on his back. Gold means this is you, so that's why you get paid more. And then it becomes a cat and mouse because there's a villain called the Rainmaker that no one knows who he is, and he's the reason for everything. He's behind everything criminal. So old Joe believes that if he can kill the Rainmaker in the current day, none of the future will happen. Young Joe is trying to fulfill his contract and kill the Looper, but also in this time the Rainmaker would be a child, and he's not going to let a child die. The child hasn't done anything wrong yet. Should you be punished for something you haven't done yet? Which is something Minority Report touched on also. The time travel is such a complex mechanism with so much that can go wrong, and they explain it in this movie in a fun manner. Essentially telling you, don't think too much about it, you'll drive yourself crazy. But it also has a few, but there's one standout scene which shows how doing something in the present affects someone or something in the future. And the scene in question is so inventive. The effects for it, everything about it is fantastic. The premise of the whole movie itself is fantastic. Simple when you look at it broadly, but executed so wonderfully by everyone involved. The acting between Gordon-Levitt and Bruce Willis, especially in the scenes they share together, is top notch. Jeff Daniels, he automatically improves pretty much any movie he's in, and his role, I see it as Jeff Daniels, it's his character from Dumb and Dumber if he wasn't dumb, if he was smart and manipulative. That's how he comes across, and it's brilliantly done. And it explores the themes of cause and effect, causality, things like that, and it provides plenty of theories to work from. Everything just works together. It's a phenomenal film. Everyone involved deserves a pat on the back, and for us, it takes the number 9 spot, just ahead of The Man with the Iron Fists. Hopping in at number 8 is another reboot. We're back to the reboot train. This time it's a reboot of a TV show, one that I didn't really watch when I was a kid. I was aware of it, but I didn't really watch it, and it's 21 Jump Street. A reboot of a TV show, or a sequel to a TV show. One especially that worked so well back in the day, from objectively looking at it and reading about it, that this movie works so much better than it has any right to be, is phenomenal. Jonah Hill and Channing Tatum are just perfect together as the leads, and the supporting cast of Brie Larson, Dave Franco, Robert Riggle, Ice Cube as the captain. The comedy is coarse at times, but in the best way. It has some really subtle jokes, it has some great side jokes. Sometimes it's just broad, blunt, forced trauma style comedy, in the sense of it just joke after joke off your head, and everything just seems to work. It hits the perfect tone, and the chemistry between the two leads, as I say, is just phenomenal. You do get a sense that these people have been around each other for such a long time that they know each other almost in and out. Ice Cube is fantastic comic relief as their captain, and everything about the film just works. The humour works, the pathos when it comes time to actually get some emotion into it works a lot because it contrasts with the comedy, and the fact that it did so well it got a sequel when a few of the other movies that I've mentioned didn't, is so well received that it got a sequel, is just the icing on the cake. This is another one of those movies that when Josh is a little older, he's seen clips in here and there, so he kind of knows what it is. But this is going to be one of the ones I'm going to love watching with him and laughing along with him. And I look forward to that day when Josh can watch our number 8 movie of 2012. Slipping in at number 7 is a Tarantino joint, Django Unchained. And this, I wouldn't say I was familiar with the original Django movies. I'd seen a few, but generally they were on like late night, Channel 4, that kind of thing. So normally when I was watching them, I was drunk. So they were there, but I didn't really have much of a memory of them. So when we were getting this, which is essentially another reboot of a franchise, although this is a standalone movie, Tarantino's never went back to it. He doesn't do sequels. Arguably, Kill Bill 2 isn't a sequel, it's a second volume of a larger story. Jamie Foxx is a revelation as Django. The D is silent. It introduced me, at least, I'm sure it introduced most people to Christoph Waltz, who is just perfect in this movie. And he has been a highlight of virtually every movie he's been in since then. And this was the first time I had seen him in a movie, and I was overjoyed with his performance. Leonardo DiCaprio was in it. He plays against type as a nasty plantation slave owner. Kerry Washington, stunning in this movie. She gives as good as she get acting wise. She's just a beautiful woman, and in the backdrop of this movie, she just stands head and shoulders above everyone else. Samuel L. Jackson's in it. Walton Goggins, another one who is just one of the best character actors, supporting actors in movies today and TV. Does a lot of TV as well. James Remar's in it, who also does a lot of great supporting roles. And Don Johnson, as a KKK member, is also absolutely fantastic. Everyone in this movie is pitch perfect in the roles. The roles that they play, everyone has been cast astoundingly well. And the leads, Jamie Foxx and Christoph Waltz, just have amazing chemistry. They just work so well together on the screen, and you never get a sense that one is a support of the other. Almost a symbiotic relationship between the two. The violence, and is quite brutal, is counterbalanced by humour, which is also quite brutal. And there's some fantastic moments where they combine, and there's times when they just work together with such synergy. It's a cinematic masterpiece. It's a perfect example of how you reboot a character for a modern age without updating the setting to modern times, how you pay homage to the originals. Frank Nero, who played Django in the original movies, has a little cameo in this as well. Leonardo DiCaprio, again, I mentioned he's fantastic in his role, and he gave us some great memes from the movie. Tarantino is a divisive director in the sense of some people think he's overrated. The only movie that he's done that I didn't really like was The Hateful Eight. Obviously, some are much better than others. Actually, my favourite movie of his is one he didn't direct, is one he wrote, which is True Romance. Which, if you haven't seen True Romance, give it a watch. Ridley Scott does a fantastic job with it. It has my favourite scene from any movie in the Sicilian scene. It's such a wonderfully acted piece where little ticks and nuances build and build and build, and when you've seen it before and you watch it again, you catch so much. But this is a fantastic movie also, and it fully deserves its spot on this list at number 7. Whooping in at number 6, next on the list, is the culmination of what some people consider to be the best superhero trilogy of movies committed to cinema, and it's Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight Rises. The Dark Knight came out in 2008, so it's 4 years between that and this film. The posthumous Oscar was fully deserved for Heath Ledger's Joker. Some would say that was the pinnacle of superhero movies, was his performance. So it was always going to be hard to follow that up. And especially after Heath Ledger died, there was a lot of, would they recast the Joker? If not, would they reference the Joker? And they didn't, which was surprising, but understandable. The novelisation of the film does mention the Joker, because they mention that Arkham Asylum had been emptied of everyone who was put into Blackgate other than the Joker himself. So when the timeline of The Dark Knight Rises is going on, Joker is still considered to be in Arkham, though he may have escaped, and all the hubbub of what was going on, especially with the No Man Land thing that happens in this film. It catches up. At the end of The Dark Knight, Batman had essentially disappeared. He'd taken the blame for Harvey Dent's murders, his crimes, so that the Dent Act could go through and Harvey Dent would still be canonised as Gotham's White Knight Saviour. So Batman is gone. Bruce Wayne is still around, but he's kind of holed up in his mansion. That's due to his grief from Rachel Dawes being killed in The Dark Knight. So he's kind of reclused himself there. Gordon has been commissioner for a number of years now. And then suddenly another, possibly the other iconic Batman villain outside Joker turns up, which is Bane. And Bane had been done in cinema before. However, unlike Joker, when it was Jack Nicholson that did it, the Bane in Batman and Robin was atrocious. Physically, the Bane in Batman and Robin works in the sense of the size of Jeeves Vincent, who played him in The Mask, but the character was basically a mindless thug, a low intelligence thug, and that is furthest away from Bane as you can get. Bane is one of the most intelligent villains that Batman has ever faced. So when they were saying they were going to bring Bane back, that was an interesting thing. So obviously coming back is Christian Bale, Michael Caine, Gary Oldman are all coming back from previous movies, as is Morgan Freeman. Joseph Gordon-Levitt, who's been mentioned in this already, appears as Officer Blake. We also have Marion Cotillard joining as Miranda Tate, business associate of Bruce Wayne. We have Anne Hathaway as Selina Kyle, never called Catwoman in the movie, though there are hints to that dotted around. And finally, Tom Hardy as Bane himself. People never learn. When Heath Ledger was cast, there was uproar. Oh, the gay cowboy can't be the Joker. And they never learned. And he was, for most people, the best Joker we've ever had. I love Heath Ledger's Joker. I preferred latter Jerome and latter Jeremiah. Those versions of the Joker, they were phenomenal. And for me, they're the perfect Jokers. But cinema-wise, Heath Ledger was fantastic. So when Tom Hardy got cast as Bane, as much as he is physically imposing, especially if you've seen Bronson, he's a relatively short man. I believe he's 5'8" or 5'9". And Bane is meant to be this huge, intimidating presence. But when you see him in the movie, his Bane is terrifying. His Bane exudes a power and an authority without even trying to exude power and authority. He is viciously strong. In the movie, him and Batman have two standout fight scenes. The first one, I've gone back, I've watched the movie a number of times, but I've gone back and watched just the first fight scene on YouTube quite a bit. What's perfect about it is Bane is essentially toying with Bruce Wayne, with Batman. There's no soundtrack. The only sound is the fight. And Bane's henchmen are watching it. They're seeing their leader dominate the Dark Knight, who has protected Gotham and kept Gotham safe for so long. And the fight is brutal. And the second fight is also fantastic as well. The way the second fight is done, it's obviously Bane is now in the back foot because Batman has come back. No one has ever came back. He even says at some point in the movie, impossible, when he sees the flame bat signal, showing that Bruce has came back to Gotham. And it's a great trilogy closer. Christopher Nolan had his vision for 3 movies, he stuck to it, and it works so well. Tom Hardy's Bane doesn't have, ironically considering what he would star in 6 years later, Tom Hardy's Bane has no venom injections, but they work it in a realistic, grounded fashion, which is the standard for this Nolan Batverse. Michael Caine and Gary Oldman continue to hold things together with their performances. The opening scene to the movie, the plane heist, which was done practically, is astounding in its fantastic nature, but also its realism and how it works. You get a sense, in that opening 15 minutes, you get a sense of who Bane is, why his acolytes follow him so readily, that they are willing to die for the cause, and you get a sense of everything about this character from that moment. The stadium explosion, which you see in the trailer, is perfectly done as well, and it's just a fantastic movie. I would put it, Batman Begins and The Dark Knight Rises are probably level with The Dark Knight above them, but that's a high bar for anyone to reach anyway, and The Dark Knight Rises is our number 6. Going into the back half of the countdown, we're sticking with superhero movies, this time a team-up movie, and it's the culmination of what the MCU was designed for. It's the Avengers, or in the UK, Avengers Assemble, because we already had the Avengers, which was based on a TV show and it was terrible. So we have the Avengers, and it's directed by Joss Whedon, who had oversight on the MCU at that point in time, and it's the culmination of the first phase. This was the proof that what the MCU was trying to do, which was long-form storytelling over a number of movies with different characters and then intermingling them eventually and cross-breeding them, for lack of a better term, into each other's movies. The Avengers is the culmination of the story that was started in Iron Man, continued in The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, and Captain America, the First Avenger. It was all of these things coming together for the bigger threat. And the way it was done very organically. The end of Captain America, he had been found in ice, and that sets him up for being part of the Avengers team. Tony Stark has obviously been the original member of the team, in the sense of he was the first one Nick Fury came to. Black Widow had been established at this point. The Hulk had been established in his movie as Edward Norton, but then hadn't been seen since, so he was the big revelation in this film, because the other characters had been around. So you had Robert Downey Jr. coming back as Iron Man, Chris Evans as Captain America, you had Chris Hemsworth as Thor, you had Tom Hiddleston returning as Loki, we had Clark Gregg as Phil Coulson, who'd been in a number of movies at this point and would then go on to be in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Jeremy Renner returned as Hawkeye after his cameo in Thor. Then we have Kobe Smulders as Maria Hill. Stellan Skarsgård, and Samuel L. Jackson rounding out the cast as Nick Fury. You put all that together, and that's a hell of a cast to try and juggle this. And they do it really well by establishing part, and Thor doesn't show up till a bit later, till the second act. And the introduction and their first interaction, the introductions and their first interactions, it's comic book geek me was 12-year-old me watching this on the screen and just being astounded by what I could see. Everything about it just worked. It's the culmination of what would become Phase 1. Expertly combined all the heroes and their stories to come into this one massive event, which was the Chitauri invasion of Earth through New York at the hands of Loki. It seems quaint now after having Civil War, Infinity War, and Endgame, but back then, having a team up was what comic book fans had always wanted in their movies. For too long, we had comic book movies, and they may make the odd sly reference and nod to other properties, but they never intermingled. So you would have like a Superman movie, you would have a Batman movie, but they would never be together. You would have a Spider-Man movie alongside an X-Men movie, and they would never be together. They would never overtly reference each other. So now we had everyone together. And one of the standout shots in the movie, which was in the trailer as well, is the circle shot of the Avengers becoming the Avengers as a team for the first time. That is preceded by possibly one of the greatest reveals and one of the greatest surprises and revelations is that Bruce Banner is always angry. And that moment, transformation, punching the Leviathan, causing it to cascade and crash, essentially turning the tide in the battle. Every set piece was just done perfectly with the right blend of humour and the violence not being too brutal, but the hits, because of what these people are, the hits being full force, but because they're gods and super soldiers and armoured men. Special mention to the puny god climactic fight between Loki and Hulk. It subverts what you were expecting, but it's also what it should always have been. And Tom Hiddleston as Loki, who was fantastic in Thor, who essentially steals the show whenever he's around. He is this character, and for him to return to be the big bad with a new weapon, the Mind Stone, which we didn't know was the Mind Stone at the time, just a scepter with a blue jewel in it. And that was given to him by a character introduced in a post-credits thing, a gentleman who would go on to be the antagonist of the Infinity Saga, Big Purple Head himself, Thanos. And what was fantastic about this was Phase 1 had just come to an end. And we thought this was the big building, we've had the Avengers, we'll go and do some other things now. And then they escalated it again by having the biggest threat to everything appear at the end to show you it's the end of Phase 1, but it's not the end of this story, which had eventually become known as the Infinity Saga and last 22 movies. And that itself is a testament to what the MCU is, what it's done right, the powerhouse it is at the box office, and the blueprint for how to do long-term storytelling. Because by the time we got to Infinity War, it had been 10 years and 19 movies, I believe. It was 19 movies by the time we got to Infinity War. And that is unheard of before. It will never be done again. Even the MCU, that's unheard of. It's never been done before. It will never be done again. Even the MCU will probably never go that long for their overall story. But the fact that they pulled it off is astounding. And what's also astounding in this movie is the fact that with all the action and the comic book heroes, it's a character-driven story. And a lot of the MCU movies, most of them are character-driven stories surrounded by this action. And the Avengers showed that it worked, and it set the blueprint for how to do it going forward in the MCU and for those who have tried and failed. The fact that it's still going strong now, obviously the COVID pandemic has put a block on it for the moment, but we should be in phase 4 right now. Black Widow should have come out, and there's including the TV shows that they've got on Disney Plus now, there should be around 23 movies and TV shows, 20 something anyway, movies and TV shows, some of them more strongly linked to the MCU as a whole, others loose spin-offs, especially What If, which is going to be, I believe it's a 10 episode series. What If, it's an animated series, which, as in the comics, is an alternative take on an established story. So what if Peggy Carter got the super soldier serum rather than Steve Rogers? That's a what if. What if Tony Stark never came back from Afghanistan? What if Loki had won? You know, those kind of things. What would the stories be? So that is obviously going to be separate from everything else, but the rest seems to be all part of the wider MCU, and I can't wait. This is something I've been waiting on, or had been waiting on for such a long time, and the fact that we're in the midst of it just fills my heart with joy. And Avengers taking the number 5 spot is also a wonderful achievement for them. Popping up at number 4 is a book adaptation starring Colin Farrell and Sam Rockwell, directed by Martin McDonagh. It's a movie called Seven Psychopaths. Very few people that I've spoken to have actually seen this movie, but I absolutely adore it. I watch it sometimes as a double bill with In Bruges. It has similar levels of humour, similar tones of humour. Colin Farrell and Sam Rockwell are amazing in it. Woody Harrelson, Christopher Walken is just great value. Tom Waits is hilarious, darkly so, is very dark humour. Abby Cornish and Olga Kurylenko, who I had such a crush on in Max Payne. They round out the cast, and it's a very black comedy. For me, it's Farrell's best work since In Bruges, which is how I like to put them together. It's infinitely quotable. The two leads are phenomenal together. The violence is brutal, vicious, but in keeping with the tone of the humour of the movie. There's a fantastic unexpected revelation partway through. The whole premise is fun. Colin Farrell's trying to write this script called Seven Psychopaths, and he essentially ends up crossing a number of psychopaths to get inspiration for this story that he's trying to write. And everything about it just works so well. If you're a fan of In Bruges, you will love this. It deserves a much wider audience than it has, and it's another example of how Colin Farrell is this fantastic actor, whether he's in a lead role or a supporting role. Sam Rockwell is always great value, whether he's in a serious movie or a comedic role. Christopher Walken is just phenomenal as well. Everything, as I said, everything just comes together beautifully. And Seven Psychopaths is a very worthy number 4 for 2012. Creeping in at number 3 is a horror movie that should have been released a couple of years prior but was held back due to the studio financial issues at the time. But when it eventually got released, Chris Hemsworth had become Thor. This was made before he was Thor, and that helped generate a lot of publicity for Cabin in the Woods. It's another fantastic film. It's directed by Drew Goddard, and it stars alongside Chris Hemsworth. It's got Anne Hutchinson, it's got Kristen Connolly, Frank Kranz, Jesse Williams, Richard Jenkins, and Bradley Whitford are in the movie also, and it's such a subversion of horror movies. If you've seen the trailer, there's one thing in the trailer that I wish they hadn't shown, which is when the bird flies into the invisible grid. If they'd kept that out, you'd be none the wiser that there was something else going on. It would just look like a horror movie. And then the movie opens and it's just like, what's this? Because it's not a horror, it's an office job. And like this big factory, it's like an office job. And then we come to realise that all the horrors that we know, everything, are staged. And they're staged because the old one, the ancient gods, I'm not sure if they're the Greek gods or not, but the one that comes out at the end of the movie is definitely Kronos, or an approximation of Kronos. But all of these horror movie tropes that we see, and all the horror movie events that we've seen in previous films, are actually set up around the world, so all different countries' horror movies are in the same boat, to sacrifice a set amount of people: the jock, the virgin, the jester, the whore, that kind of thing. And there's all these stereotypes to be sacrificed, and the final girl can survive. And with that, it's a deconstruction of pretty much everything. There's so many Easter eggs in this movie. Even as a straight horror, ignoring what we know, it's actually very effective. But when it starts subverting everything, it just works so well. It's essentially a horror film's deconstruction dream scenario. I put it on a par with Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, which is one of my favourite horror movies ever, in showing the behind the scenes of horror movie icons and how they do things and why. It explains the tropes in a logical way without making fun of any of them. The office setting is such a dry humour that it completely offsets everything else that we can see. All of the cast, everyone in the cast excels in their roles. The premise of why certain things would happen in a horror movie is explained so well. Because how many times have you screamed at a horror movie saying, "Don't go up the stairs, don't open the door, don't split up"? And in this movie, it explains why those things happen and why it's so frustrating, and it's done so well. There are two sections of the movie that get paused more often than probably anything's ever been paused other than Basic Instinct back in the day. And that is, there's the whiteboard, which lists all the monsters and all the creatures that the protagonist could end up going against. The office people run a poll on it to see which ones are going to get called up. And then towards the end of the movie, we get to see the storage facility where all the monsters are kept. And it's basically, oh my god, insert favourite monster here is on the screen. And it's just beautifully done. There's so many Easter eggs, there's so many homages. There's a few original things in there as well. Joss Whedon's influence is all over it at this point in the movie. A standout comedy moment is the Merman. If you've seen the movie, you'll know why. And the ending of the film is, knowing what the film is and having seen the movie and then the ending and then watching it again, it's pretty obvious this is how it had to end. But it takes balls to end a horror movie in this way. Especially one that's played for laughs a lot of the time. Very, very dark laughs, very, very black humour. But one that does it so well, and it's an infinitely watchable movie. If you've never seen horror movies before, you'll still get a kick out of it. If you grew up with them like I did, you will get reference after reference after reference. It's infinitely rewatchable. And The Cabin in the Woods takes the bronze for 2012. We now come to number 2. And remembering back to putting all of this together, the lists together, this was the year where I debated and flipped and flopped so much with which should be number 1, which should be number 2. If I could, it would be 1A and 1B. But the nature of the countdown and this little thing down here, I only have space for 10. I can't do 11 in the final. So when I say this is number 2, it's by the slimmest of margins. And it's the found footage quasi-superhero origin movie, Chronicle. It's directed by Josh Trank, who did the Fantastic Four reboot. When he was announced, based on this movie, Chronicle, when he was announced to be the director for the Fantastic Four movie, I was so excited for what he could do with it. And there are some fantastic elements in the Fantastic Four, or Fun Four Stick as some people call it. There are some amazing elements in that movie. And it was studio interference, well chronicled, no pun intended, stories and reports about how the studio kept interfering in this film. And you can see it in the movie how badly it affected it. The tone initially was going to be almost Cronenberg body horror in a sense, and there were certain scenes like they totally messed up Doctor Doom, Victor Von Doom, but the scene where he first gets back to our dimension and wreaks havoc is phenomenal. But in Chronicle, Josh Trank kind of cut his teeth on the superhero genre. Introduced the world to Dane DeHaan, who also played Harry Osborn in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. Dane DeHaan is fantastic in this. Alex Russell. It also introduced majority of people to Michael B. Jordan as well. And then it has some other supporting characters, but essentially it's a three-prong lead story, and it's an original tale in the found footage genre. One of the fantastic things they do is that the protagonists and Dane DeHaan, who eventually becomes the antagonist, they develop powers including telekinesis. And what they then use the telekinesis for is to hold the camera. So it's a found footage movie, but because of the telekinesis aspect of the story, you can have many camera angles that wouldn't be possible in a found footage film. And it's just done perfectly. So we're actually seeing a third person view in what is essentially a found footage first person perspective. It's beautifully done. The leads are amazing. Obviously, DeHaan and Jordan would go on to much bigger things. It captures what it would be like for three friends to slowly build up these powers over time. Especially they're teenagers as well. How are you're going through a lot anyway, a lot of angst, and suddenly you've got these gifts, and you can use these gifts for good, you can use these gifts for bad. And especially when you're younger, you do things without thinking. It's not that you're being malicious, you're just lashing out. But when you've got these type of powers, you can't afford to do that lashing out. The slow burn descent into antagonism from DeHaan's character is just brilliant. He plays Andrew with a lot of justification in his actions. Yes, they're extreme, but you can see where it's came from. His unloving father, for one, is a driving influence on how he becomes what he becomes. As I mentioned, this movie is why I had such high hopes for Fantastic Four. The possibility of a sequel is there, but if they leave it as a standalone, which I imagine they're going to do now, everyone's kind of moved on from this, and it was 8 years ago now. If it's a standalone, it stays a standalone, it's a fantastic film. If we get a sequel, I would love to revisit it. I doubt they would do found footage again though, so that could take a bit away from it. But Chronicle is one of the best movies of the decade, not just 2012, but there can only be one that was the standout of the year, and unfortunately Chronicle barely missed out as our number one movie squeaked just ahead of it. And the movie that squeaks in at number one is another reboot. This again strengthening my argument that reboots can be superior to the movie that came before them, reboots and remakes. That reboots are necessary in the movie industry for keeping stories in our minds. They're essentially, and I wrote an article about horror movie remakes specifically. I did one about remakes in general, but horror movie remakes. They are essentially the campfire stories, the ghost stories, the horror stories told around the campfires when we were clansmen and things like that. And you would tell a story. I'd maybe be a visiting clansman, and you would tell this story around the campfire. It's a riveting story. But we had no paper, we had nothing to write it down with, so it was all in memory. I would then go back to my clan and I would tell the same story, but because I'm remembering it or I'm retelling it as I remember it, certain aspects will be exaggerated or omitted and new things added, and the story morphs a little bit. So it's not the story I was told, it's my remake of that story. And the horror movies are essentially the modern day campfire retelling of these ghost stories. Look at the Universal movies from the 30s, Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, Triumvirate. Then you go through the 50s, the Hammer movies, 70s, the 90s had their own versions of them. And Dracula's been done so many times in so many different ways. So reboots themselves are essential to quality movies. And this one is one of the best. It's Dread. And it's a reboot of the Stallone movie from the early 90s, which got lambasted mostly from Judge Dredd removing his helmet, which he does do in the comics very rarely, but you never see his face. Whereas in the movie Stallone, you're obviously going to see his face. But the original Judge Dredd movie, aesthetically is fantastic. The uniforms, the lawgiver, everything is just fantastic in that sense. The ABC robot is phenomenal. Mean Machine. The practical effects and everything in that movie are fantastic. It's just the tone was wrong. So then we come to 2012 and we get Carl Urban in the title role. And Carl Urban is fantastic. I actually gave him a Dread helmet, one with this size, as a gift when we met him at Wales Comic Con. He's a lot bigger than I expected, which was a surprise, because Michael Biehn, who we met a year prior, was a lot smaller than expected. So it goes to show you can never judge a book by its cover. The Carl Urban being cast as Dredd was perfect, and he got the tone right. He didn't remove his helmet at any point in the movie. There's no character growth. He's the same character he was at the end as he was in the beginning. Olivia Thirlby is in the movie as well, and she is phenomenal. Also, Lena Headey as Mama, the main villain of the movie. She's a very attractive woman, and if you watch 300 and how she's dressed in that and everything else, she just exudes this old world glamour. In this movie, that is stripped away from her, and she is mean, she is nasty, and it's another example, as I said, of how to do a reboot properly. Three main leads: Carl Urban as Dredd, Lena Headey as Mama, and Olivia Thirlby as Rookie Judge Anderson, who is a psychic. She has telepathic powers, so that's something that sets her apart from Dredd straight away. The costumes, the special effects in the movie, especially the actual special effects used to show the in-universe effect of the drug slow-mo, it's amazing. Gavin Free from Rooster Teeth and the slow-mo guys was involved in that using phantom cameras, and seeing things done at such a slow speed, especially when it's people getting shot and such, so it's not even something that's actually in camera. It's astounding work. The violence, even the non-slow-mo violence, is just brutal. There's no cutaways, there's no implied violence. It's just amazingly visceral, in your face. The set pieces, I mean, it's essentially, if you've seen The Raid, the movie's essentially The Raid, but with Judge Dredd and less martial arts. And everything just works in this universe. There's no happy ending. You don't get a happy ending in Mega City 1. And it's an amazing trait that the movie sticks with through and through. People were clamouring for a sequel to this, and we've never had one. There's supposed to be a TV series with Carl Urban reprising the role. It was even on IMDb at some point. That's never really taken any progression forward. We asked him about it when we met him at Wales Comic Con, and he didn't really know what was going on at this point with it. He's now in The Boys and killing it, literally killing it in that. So maybe we won't get the Dredd TV series. That would be a shame. If we don't, we've got this amazing standalone movie to satiate ourselves with. Again, this is infinitely rewatchable, and I'm going to wait until Josh is a bit older before we get to it, but I look forward to watching it with him, like I've said for a number of movies. And Dredd is our #1 movie of 2012, and it goes forward with Scott Pilgrim and Drive to be in contendership for our movie of the decade. It is the movie of 2012. Will it be the movie of the entire 10-year period? There's only one way to find out, which is to watch the finale in a few weeks' time, once we've gone through 2013 to 2019. But for now, for 2012, Dredd is king. Long live the judge. He is the law. And we'll see you again next week for 2013. Stay safe, wear a mask, catch you on the other side. Goodbye.